competency-based education or competency-based environment.
And how about 3 days?
Yeah, just
in a nutshell, competency-based education is, first of all, it's a system. So it's a system change. It's a different way of looking at education, and the environment then changes. But basically, in a nutshell, it means that we're going to give students credit for what they know and are able to do. We're going to require them to transfer that knowledge into some kind of a skill that's in show and demonstrate that they know it, not just check it off on a test. Well, for the most part, there could still be tests involved. And we're going to let them move on when they're ready, rather than holding them back with a group of students or pushing them on and give it. So we're going to give them that extra support. You notice that the number 4 on those principles was rapid support, when they need it and how they need it. So in a nutshell, that's what it is.
We thought we'd start with our second question around parents. And parents have most likely heard a lot about standards-based education or standards-based grading. How does this relate to CBE? Is it the same thing?
Well, the quick answer is it is not the same thing. As I think about those Iowa Department of Education guidelines, a really great way to understand what Sandra just summarized a second ago is to Google the Iowa Department of Education guidelines for PK-12 competency-based education. Again, that's what Dr. Buck was referring to there. Just some really nice principles that really outline the idea of CBE. As I look at those principles, the first one there listed is students advance upon demonstrated proficiency. And the way I like to describe it is if a student in a competency-based system showed up and within 2 weeks could somehow demonstrate that they understood everything there is to know about Algebra 2 class, we would then move them on to some other type of content class, move their next math class. In our system in Solon, we have a standards-based grading system. We would be able to tell you all of the standards that that student knew and how well they knew them. But because we are not a competency-based education system, our students do not advance upon demonstrating proficiency. They would still stay in that class for just as long as their peers. And there are some other differences here too, but that is really the primary difference between this idea of standards-based grading and competency-based education.
Again, the core idea of CBE is that a student is engaging with the standards that the state of Iowa has indicated that all Iowa students will enter and become masters of. Iowa is just one way of doing that, one way of tracking it. The way we do grading is we track a student, say they've come to us and they want to earn an English credit with us. We don't immediately set out the curriculum for them. We do not say, here are the books, here are the essays you'll write, here are the speeches you'll do, now just do them as fast as you can. I think that's a pretty big misconception about CBE, especially for gifted students. Oh, this will just let them go faster. And not necessarily. I think that it opens up an opportunity for that student to develop their personal brand, to become integrated into their community, to network, to be given that time to not worry about getting an A, and spend their time over-justified on gaining points, rather than being concerned about the innate value of the work they're doing right now, and how they can take that into college to show a professor or a lab lead or write a grant, to show they've already generated a value, they've already generated something that makes them unique. So when I think about grading, I think about, is the student making timely progress through the credits they say they want to earn with us? Is the student, should they be switching the credit they want to earn with us? Are they actually approaching a chemistry credit instead of a physics credit, just based on the way the project has gone and the way that their community partners have put money and resources into the project? We then track as the year goes on, we get halfway through the year. If the student hasn't had a significant look at half of those standards, we don't necessarily give them an F or anything like that, but we have a very intense personal conversation with their family and that student and ask the question, you're not really interested in earning this credit, it appears, or you're having a problem with X, Y, and Z standards. And so we have a really standards-based conversation with that student. Are you not on the right projects? Are you not interested in these initiatives? What's going on? And in that way we find a social-emotional take on this idea of grading, making that point. When a student finishes all of their standards with us, they do get an A. We generally don't give grades below a B, we give students I's. And we find that I to be even more motivating than an F or a D. I think it's a pretty large misconception that D's and F's motivate students. It often demotivates them to the point of quitting. And I is an open-ended F. It's an open-ended, you haven't done enough. We'd like to see you push. We'd like to have a conversation with you about what an A or a B or a completion or a P might look like. So that's how I would handle it.
And I think along with that, when they get that I, is the conversation that we end up having with students, where a lot of times in the traditional classroom, the F just ends up being a stopping point. A student failed a test and that's it. I think in the standards-based environment and a competency-based environment, the F or the I or whatever that is really opens up the conversation with students where, they did poorly, what can we do to help you? And that drives them to seek out some changes in their behaviors.
I would just say too, from the higher ed side, and I think agree or disagree with this, but we see transcripts from schools from all over the country, and certainly from Iowa, from both of our institutions, but we see all kinds of different grading scales and different ways of measuring student success and achievement in different realms. So we admit, both of our institutions admit homeschooled students. We see portfolio presented without any grades at all. We see scales that are 15-point scales, traditional 4-point, weighted 4.5-point scales. So we see that full realm, and yet we as higher education institutions are able to look at what the students have demonstrated in terms of what the schools tell us and the school districts tell us these students have met in terms of their standards and their achievement, and that's what we're basing our decisions on. Will the students be successful to graduate in our institutions? That's sort of the bottom line, I think, for most of us. We can go into that a lot more. That's the basics for us, I think, of grades.
About, well, the second part about elementary, it's basically the same thing. When you say to a student, here's what you need to learn, here's a way to learn it, do you have a different way? Do you have some other way? And there's kind of a gradual release. Actually, the person from Alaska, where they started this about 25 years ago, told me that if you start this conversation with students when they're in kindergarten, and you give them these options and say, here's what we're going to learn, here's why we're learning it, here's a way to learn it, now we're going to do this together. And then you give them, here's a way and here's a way, which way do you want to go? Then you give them, here's a way, here's an idea, would you like to develop the idea? By the time they're in 5th and 6th grade, they are able to own their own learning and to say to you, that's what you want me to learn? I think I have an idea. What if I do this?
I'd like to comment on this one. Largely, this question is I would say almost irrelevant, okay? In this district, in the mid-70s, I think I could still get my hand on it. I probably have 50 to 60 letters that were sent out by the assistant superintendent of this school district of all kinds of universities across the country in regard to this question. And almost to a college, they said we would have no trouble with that at all. My challenge is basically the call to action is we can't wait another 50 years to make these kinds of changes. Frankly, now let's look at higher ed. Okay. Right now, higher ed is in competition for students. That has an implication for how they're going to admit people. So the standards are going to get set there, number one. Number two, what do you think is going to happen in higher ed if higher ed continued to rely upon just a grade and a transcript for its graduates? Everybody going out for a job has grades and transcripts. And so all higher ed is doing the same thing. How do we build a richer body of evidence to show that the University of Iowa experience, the UNI experience, the Kirkwood experience is quality at a high level, and that when you hire one of our grads, you can fully understand that they are competent because they have more than a number in a little box or a sheet of paper. They can speak to the evidence of how they improved. They can talk about their failures and how they overcame them. They can talk about how they deal with diversity in the workplace. That's the richness of a higher ed education, and it's occurring already. So this question, I think it's time to set that one aside and get into the work of what does a community really want to do in regard to rolling up its sleeves and saying, let's start honoring everything that goes on in the student's life and give them credit and challenge them to apply and create a new context wherever possible.
Education for kids that prepares them for their future. And ideas like competency-based education are absolutely on the right path. So we're trying to align the system in ways that make sense. I think competency-based education plays a role in that. And as has been mentioned here tonight, it's not the only solution, but it's a way to think about schools. It's, I think, important and meaningful for kids. So I've been energized by this conversation tonight, so thank you.
Conversation, and I'll harken back to some of our panelists. If you went back 100 years and you went into our schools, we don't have one-room schoolhouses anymore. But really, the system has not changed much. We earn grades by points over time. Our system has not changed much in the last 100 years. And that system was created to separate the wheat from the chaff. Someone said that on the panel. We needed students who got A's and we need students who got F's because we need laborers to do things in our society. My father graduated in 1952 with a high school diploma, and he had the choice to work at either Deere or Rab. Great job, great pay, great benefits. All right? Our society has changed since 1900, it's changed since 1950, and why now? Because we can't lose another generation in a system that's 100 years old or more. We need to expect more of our kids. Our global society, our business partners, they expect us not to separate the wheat from the chaff. They expect us to graduate students who have the ability, the knowledge, and the competencies to be successful either in the workplace, in higher education, in a community college setting, in an apprenticeship. They expect all of our kids to achieve in their next step, whatever that may be. And our system is not set up, it was not designed to do that. It never was designed to do that. So I would say we can't, it's not why now, it's why haven't we before this point in time. I think Al talked about 50 years. We don't have another 50 years to make these changes. But we can't do it in 6 months either. All right? At College Community, we've set out a 10-year plan. We think that 10 years is the right amount of time to change our system. Because the system has to change to truly do this.